with a sound. No family in West Africa ever wants to hear the sharp crack of gunfire echoing through quiet neighborhoods, followed by the panicked voices of people running for safety. Mothers pulled their children indoors. Street vendors abandoned their stalls. In Cotonou, the economic heart of Benin, uncertainty settled over the city like a dark cloud. Many older residents whispered, "Not again. Not after all these years." Just minutes later, the nation was shaken by a televised announcement. A group of soldiers claimed they had removed President Patrice Talon from power. They demanded that citizens recognize a new military committee for refoundation led by a lieutenant colonel few in the country had ever heard of. For many Americans watching from afar, this may seem sudden or surprising. But for people in Benin and for those who have followed Africa news closely, this eruption was years in the making. Because beneath the surface of Benin's carefully polished image of stability, something fragile had been cracking. The opposition had been suffocated. Key political figures were jailed or barred from elections. And as President Talon prepared to step down, he had already chosen his successor, a move critics compared to the Putin-Medvedev model where power never truly changes hands, only the face in front. So the real question isn't just what happened tonight, but why did it feel inevitable to so many people? How does a nation that once stood as a symbol of democratic renewal in West Africa now find itself on the edge of yet another military takeover? And if this can happen in Benin, a country many believed was immune to such turmoil, what does it mean for the entire region, from Guinea-Bissau to Burkina Faso under President Ibrahim Traoré? If you believe these stories deserve deeper understanding beyond the headlines, please stay with us. And if you care about truth, dignity, and the future of African leadership, consider subscribing so you never miss an update. Long before the world heard the official reports, ordinary people in Benin felt the tension in their bones. Some spoke later of waking up to the distant rattle of automatic gunfire. Others described the eerie wail of security sirens cutting through the early morning quiet. For families living near the presidential residence, the night had transformed without warning into a battlefield. Mothers held their children close while neighbors whispered through cracked doors, trying to piece together what was happening just a few streets away. The target of the attack became clear almost immediately: the private residence of President Patrice Talon. Witnesses reported seeing armed soldiers surrounding the compound, and several residents recalled hearing heavy bursts of gunfire that lasted far longer than anything resembling a warning shot. This wasn't a protest, nor a spontaneous act of anger. This was coordinated, deliberate, and unmistakably military. As gunfire echoed through Cotonou, the country's economic capital, Benin's political order began to shake. People stayed indoors, fearful that the violence might spread. Older citizens, those who remembered the volatile coups of the 1970s, told their families to stay low, stay quiet, and wait. Many said later that the fear wasn't just about bullets, it was the dread of waking up in a country that no longer belonged to its people. Then came the broadcast, not from the president, not from parliament, but from a group of uniformed soldiers who appeared unexpectedly on national television. Calm, stern, and visibly prepared, they announced that Patrice Talon had been removed from power. They declared the formation of a military committee for refoundation, an organization they claimed would guide the nation back to order. And at the center of this surprise proclamation was a man almost no one in the country had ever heard of: Lieutenant Colonel Pascal Tigri. His name spread through social media within minutes. Who is he? People asked. Where did he come from? How does he have the authority to claim the presidency? The questions multiplied, but the answers were few. Even regional analysts admitted they knew virtually nothing about him. His sudden appearance only fed the sense of shock and uncertainty spreading through Benin. But even as the world reacted, many inside the country were not surprised that something had finally broken. The attack on Talon's home and the televised declaration felt to some like the eruption of a volcano that had been rumbling underground for years. For nearly a decade, President Talon's rule had become increasingly controversial. Though he presented himself internationally as a reformer, a businessman who modernized infrastructure and boosted economic indicators, critics inside Benin saw another reality. Opposition parties had been weakened, their leaders jailed, exiled, or barred from elections. Former President Thomas Boni Yayi, once a central political figure, watched as many in his party were systematically eliminated from the political landscape. As Benin approached a new presidential election, Talon's decision to handpick his successor only deepened suspicion. His chosen replacement finance minister, Romanuel Watani, was widely believed to be a loyalist, someone who would protect Talon's influence even after he stepped down. For many, this raised an unsettling question. Was Talon truly leaving power or merely changing seats so he could govern from behind the curtain? These fears lingered for months. They were whispered in markets, in taxi rides, in churches and mosques. People sensed that the political system had become too tight, too controlled, too unwilling to allow genuine competition. So when soldiers attacked the president's residence, many citizens, despite their fear, said to themselves, "This is not a surprise." Yet nothing about the moment felt ordinary. Not the sound of bullets near the president's home, not the televised announcement by unknown officers, not the sudden appearance of a mysterious lieutenant colonel claiming authority over the nation's future. It was a moment that marked the end of Benin's fragile calm and the beginning of a crisis whose consequences would soon stretch far beyond the president, the soldiers, or even the borders of the country. In the hours that followed the gunfire near the presidential residence, Benin found itself suspended between fear and disbelief. People stayed inside their homes, glued to their radios and televisions, waiting for clarity. Others stood cautiously at their front gates, scanning the roads for signs of soldiers, armored trucks, or fleeing officials. The tension grew thicker with each minute of silence from the government. Then suddenly, the silence broke. A commotion rippled through neighborhoods as phones buzzed with the same message, "Turn on the TV now." When households across the country switched to the national broadcaster, they were met not with the president addressing the nation, but with a row of stern-faced soldiers in full uniform. The image alone sent a chill down the spine of anyone old enough to remember the coup of the 1970s. The lead spokesman, his voice steady and unshaken, delivered the message with startling clarity. President Patrice Talon had been removed. A new leadership body, the Military Committee for Refoundation, had taken control. And at the head of this committee was Lieutenant Colonel Pascal Tigre, a name that meant almost nothing to the general public. No past interviews, no public speeches, no recognizable role in government. To many, he was a figure appearing from complete obscurity at the moment of national crisis. This moment, the televised declaration, became the climax of the entire episode. For ordinary citizens, it was the moment when fear turned into a haunting realization that the political ground beneath them had shifted. Some families wept quietly, others prayed. Older citizens who had lived through Benin's era of repeated coups whispered to their children, "This is how it starts." Yet even amid the shock, there was a strange sense of predictability. For months, analysts and activists had warned that Benin's political tensions were reaching a breaking point. The suppression of opposition voices, the imprisonment of key political figures, and the widespread belief that the upcoming election would be nothing but a handover from Talon to his loyalist Romanuel Watani, all these had created an atmosphere thick with frustration. Many believed the so-called democratic process had been hollowed out. What looked like stability from the outside felt suffocating from within. Because of this, the soldiers' announcement did not feel like a bolt from the blue. Instead, to some, it felt like an eruption long overdue, not because they desired a coup, but because they had feared that the political system left no room for genuine reform. Still, the uncertainty was terrifying. Would the coup succeed? Would the president retaliate? Would the streets fill with fighting? No one knew. And that uncertainty created its own kind of panic. Benin's neighbors reacted quickly. Ghanaian analysts speaking from across the border cautioned that this event could trigger a regional chain reaction. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and most recently Guinea-Bissau had all experienced coups or attempted coups. The idea of West Africa sliding back into a coup-prone era no longer felt theoretical, it was unfolding in real time. ECOWAS, already preparing for an emergency summit to address instability in Guinea-Bissau, suddenly had a new crisis on its agenda. Diplomats expressed concern privately that if even Benin, once considered one of the most stable democracies in the region, could fall into turmoil, then no country in West Africa could claim immunity. International observers struggled to understand the speed of the event. Western governments, accustomed to viewing Benin as a reform success story, were caught off guard by the idea that widespread dissatisfaction had been simmering beneath the surface. Some foreign analysts admitted they had underestimated the impact of political exclusion and the mistrust citizens felt toward Talon's succession plans. Inside Benin, the emotional landscape was more complex. A mixture of fear, anger, and grim resignation spread among the population. Many did not support soldiers taking power, but they also did not believe Talon's version of democracy was genuine. For some, the military announcement felt like a breakdown. For others, a painful confirmation of what they had long suspected: the institutions meant to protect the people had been compromised. By the end of the day, Benin stood at a crossroads with no clear path forward. The coup attempt may or may not succeed, but one truth had crystallized: the political system had reached a point of rupture, and the reactions at home and abroad revealed just how fragile the region had become. For the families living near the presidential residence, the gunfire may have stopped, but the emotional shock did not fade with the sunrise. Children who once walked confidently to school now clung to their parents. Shopkeepers opened their stalls halfway, glancing nervously at every passing vehicle. The city did not feel like the Cotonou they knew. It felt suspended, unsure whether the worst had passed or was still on its way. The first and most immediate consequence of the attempted coup was psychological. Ordinary citizens, many of whom had never lived through political violence, suddenly found themselves confronting the fragility of their country's institutions. For older residents, memories of the 1970s resurfaced, an era when coups were frequent and uncertainty was a way of life. The fear was not just for their own safety, but for the future of a nation they had hoped was moving beyond its troubled past. Economically, the shockwaves were immediate. Business meetings were canceled, investors paused new ventures, and even international partners hesitated. One Ghanaian analyst interviewed in the aftermath revealed that he was scheduled to meet European investors interested in expanding petroleum distribution across West Africa, but the meeting was abandoned as soon as the news of the attempted coup broke. This single example reflected a broader reality: instability is costly, and the people who pay the highest price are often not politicians but workers, traders, and families whose livelihoods depend on steady markets. Politically, the consequences were even more profound. For years, Benin had positioned itself as a beacon of order in a region rattled by coups. International observers praised the country's infrastructure growth and economic reforms. But inside Benin, frustration had been deepening. Many citizens felt excluded from political life. Opposition figures had been jailed or pushed out of the system. Whole parties, including those tied to former President Thomas Boni Yayi, were stripped of their influence. The coup attempt forced the nation to confront an uncomfortable truth: stability built on exclusion is brittle. As one analyst put it, "We pretend to have democracy, but we do not have it." That sentence captured the emotional weight of the moment. It was not merely about Talon or his chosen successor. It was about a democratic system that citizens no longer trusted. And when trust collapses, instability fills the gap. The coup attempt also exposed the limits of controlled political succession. Talon's decision to select Finance Minister Romanuel Watani as his replacement without allowing for competitive political participation was widely seen as a carefully managed transfer of power. Many feared Talon would continue governing from behind the scenes in a model reminiscent of the Putin-Medvedev era in Russia. For those who felt silenced by this arrangement, the coup attempt was not a surprise. It was the natural consequence of a system that had run out of peaceful avenues for dissent. Socially, the event deepened existing divides. Supporters of the ruling party condemned the military action, describing it as reckless and damaging to the nation's progress. But others, including those marginalized under Talon's rule, viewed the attempted coup as a desperate response to a political environment that no longer felt open or fair. This divergence in opinion revealed a country fractured not just by political ideology, but by differing experiences of daily life prosperity, for some stagnation for many. The broader regional context added another layer of concern. With Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Guinea-Bissau already navigating their own political upheavals, Benin's crisis raised fears that the entire West African corridor was becoming politically combustible. For citizens across the region, each new coup or attempt reinforces the sense that the post-colonial democratic model endorsed by Western governments is failing to deliver stability or justice. By the close of the first 24 hours, one reality had become clear: the consequences of the attempted coup extended far beyond the gunfire. It exposed deep fractures within Benin's political system, intensified economic anxiety, strained regional stability, and left millions wondering whether their country was entering a new era of uncertainty or finally confronting truths that had long been ignored. For many Americans following Africa news from a distance, the attempted coup in Benin may appear to be just another episode in a troubled region. But to policymakers in Washington and to diplomats across Europe, Asia, and the African continent, this event struck a deeper, more unsettling chord. It was not simply about a change in leadership or a power struggle within a small West African nation. It signaled a widening fracture in a geopolitical landscape that the United States has tried unsuccessfully at times to stabilize. In recent years, the U.S. has viewed Benin as one of the last predictable partners in an increasingly unpredictable region. After Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger distanced themselves from Western alliances and took a more independent political path, Benin remained, at least on paper, a government aligned with Western democratic frameworks. Aid programs continued, military cooperation persisted, and development initiatives moved forward. So the shock in Washington was not just about the violence itself, it was about what the coup attempt represented: the loss of yet another foothold in the Sahel. American analysts immediately recognized the broader implications. West Africa is home to several crucial supply chains, including petroleum, agricultural goods, and strategic minerals essential for global manufacturing. Instability disrupts trade routes, raises security costs, and creates vulnerabilities that rival powers are quick to exploit. China, for instance, has expanded its investments across Africa with remarkable speed, often filling the vacuum left by Western disengagement. Russia, through both state channels and private military networks, has also positioned itself as an appealing alternative for governments frustrated with Western conditionality. From this strategic lens, the attempted coup in Benin is not isolated. It is part of a larger struggle for influence in a region undergoing seismic political change. European nations see the crisis through a similar lens, but with different anxieties. The European Union fears spillover effects that could intensify migration flows or destabilize trade partnerships along the Gulf of Guinea. France, once deeply embedded in West Africa's political and military systems, now faces a rapidly diminishing role after being pushed out of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Benin's instability adds yet another crack to the facade of French influence, a reminder that its decades-long political model in the region is no longer accepted by populations seeking real sovereignty. International institutions like ECOWAS and the African Union also face credibility challenges. Each new coup, successful or attempted, exposes the limitations of their enforcement mechanisms. ECOWAS, which once prided itself on curbing military takeovers, now finds itself struggling to respond effectively, as one member state after another rejects externally defined versions of democracy. The planned ECOWAS summit, initially focused on Guinea-Bissau, must now contend with yet another crisis that questions the organization's ability to maintain regional stability. For the United States, especially for older Americans who lived through the Cold War, the situation may feel familiar. Once again, global powers are competing for influence in regions undergoing political realignment. Once again, ideology, economics, and military partnerships intersect. And once again, Washington must decide whether to double down on its traditional approach or rethink its engagement model entirely. Some American observers are beginning to draw parallels between Benin's unrest and the wider wave of political reawakening seen in countries like Burkina Faso under President Ibrahim Traoré. Whether one agrees with these leaders or not, their message is unmistakable. Populations across Africa are rejecting political systems they believe were shaped more by external interests than by their own aspirations. The question now is whether the world, including the United States, is ready to understand what this moment truly represents: not chaos for its own sake, but a profound demand for dignity, representation, and genuine sovereignty. As the dust slowly settles over Cotonou, one truth grows harder to ignore. Benin is no longer the quiet success story many outsiders believed it to be. The attempted coup did not simply challenge a president, it challenged the very foundation of a political system that millions depended on, a system that for too long had been praised for stability rather than examined for legitimacy. And now, in the eyes of ordinary Beninese citizens, that foundation looks more fragile than ever. What unfolded this week is more than a national crisis. It is a warning not only to West Africa, but to the entire world. When people feel unheard, when opposition is silenced, when elections lose meaning, and when leaders cling to power through carefully engineered transitions, the consequences eventually break through the surface. Sometimes they appear as protests, sometimes as civil unrest, and sometimes, as we saw in Benin, they erupt in the form of soldiers appearing on national television with a message no one can ignore. But the deeper danger lies not in the coup attempt itself, it lies in what comes next. If Benin fails to confront the roots of its political fracture, instability will linger like a slow-moving storm. Investors will hesitate, young people will lose faith in the possibility of peaceful change, and the entire region already shaken by turbulence in Mali, Niger, Guinea-Bissau, and Burkina Faso may slide further toward a point of no return. The same question echoes across the region. Is this the price of a democracy that is democratic in name but not in substance? And for those of us watching from abroad, especially here in the United States, this moment invites a sober reflection. Are we witnessing a collapse or a transformation? Is this chaos or the painful beginning of a political awakening? Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso argue that Africa is shedding old systems imposed or encouraged by outside powers. Whether one agrees or not, the momentum behind this awakening is undeniable. The attempted coup in Benin is part of a larger wave, a re-examination of governance, dignity, and sovereignty across the continent. So tonight I leave you with a question. Do you believe West Africa is rejecting a broken model, or do you fear this turmoil is only the beginning of deeper instability? And more importantly, can the United States truly support democracy abroad without understanding the voices of the people living through these crises? If these are questions you believe deserve thoughtful discussion beyond the headlines, beyond the noise, then this is a space for you. Please share this video if you want more people to understand what is really happening in West Africa. And subscribe if you believe, as we do, that truth matters and that the future of Africa from Benin to Burkina Faso deserves to be told with honesty, dignity, and depth.